Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library, and I am super excited to be back here with Leelynn Brady at Sometimes Leelynn Reads on Instagram. She's a Bookstagrammer, and she is talking about inclusive and diverse books for really like a bunch of ages, middle grade, young adult, and adult. So, although we do know a lot of adults read YA, so that's okay with me. I certainly do. Anyways, before we get started, I just want to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs and to Leelynn for letting us share this program with other libraries. So she's going to go through a bunch of recommendations and I'll have questions for her. If you have questions for her, feel free to put them in the chat. If you've read something really great recently, put that in the chat as well. And I'll send out a list of everything that people have recommended and Leelynn's list after the talk. So you don't have to be like furiously writing things down either because I will send it to you afterwards. Leelynn, thanks for being here again. This is like one of my favorite half hours of the month.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry for the change in location, getting ready to leave, but I'm here and I'm happy. Okay. So the first book that I'm going to start with is actually another shout out to my page surfer group. It's called All My Rage by Sabaa Tahir. This is our monthly book club read for the month actually, and it takes place in two different timelines. So in Lahore, Pakistan in the past, and then California, Juniper, California in the present. And the stories combine because the story in the past is the main character's mom, but in the present, she's no longer around. So we're trying to figure out what necessarily happened with why why she's not around anymore, what kind of led up to that situation, but also our two younger main characters, which are high schoolers, Salahuddin and Noor, they are both dealing with a lot of rage and being mistreated by people in their school and their community, but also having a lot of different familial issues as well. So this book was it was a really great book, and it like the title All My Rage, I was very rageful, wrathful at a lot of different places, and I'm not laughing because it's funny. I'm laughing because my reaction really was like, oh my gosh, this was the perfect title for this. Sabaa Tahir normally writes fantasy, so young adult fantasy, and this was her first non-fantasy book, and she did such an amazing job with this. This was one of my favorite books ever. But Noor and Salahuddin also goes by Sal. There's a lot of trigger warnings in this, so just please take care of your mental health. And they're having to deal with a lot of racial discrimination, racial prejudice, a lot of violence toward themselves, police brutality in certain situations, police intimidation, and then other types of situations like alcoholism, depression, drug use stuff. So that's a little bit of a spoiler alert as far as the trigger warnings or content warnings that you may have. But this was such a beautiful, beautiful story by Sabaa Tahir, and it's called All My Rage.
So I have to ask about Sabaa because she really she like burst onto the scene. I mean, she was one of the first really amazing fantasy writers from a diverse background that I know of. And so what was it? Was it timing? What was it that made everybody realize that she was just such a great like that she got accepted?
So for me, I feel like she hasn't even got enough praise sometimes,
Oh,
like compared to some others. But I think it was maybe the intensity of the Ember and the Ashes quartet. It's four books, and just like the type of content that it was about. I had read it a little bit ago, and it was just really intense. But I feel like it really related not only to what was going on in our world, like historically, but also in the present. And there are just ways to connect with these characters in a way that a lot of people were able to.
mhm.
And I know sometimes for some people it's hard to be able to relate to certain characters if they don't have the same background as them. But this one really dealt with like different forms of oppression and finding strength in in grief, in sorrow, and it was almost reminiscent of a lot of epic fantasies that take place in either like I was gonna say Middle East, but it is actually Roman inspired when I was looking into it, or like it was kind of reminiscent of the Roman Empire. But I'm just I'm just really glad that her work is celebrated, and I'm really glad that she's, you know, been able to get on the scene the way that she has. And I just wish that there was more. Like I need more special editions of her books. I just, I want her to be celebrated some more. And then that's not to say that she doesn't deserve it, because I said I don't think she has been as much as I thought, but that's I when I think about some other authors as well, I feel like she hasn't had as much publicity either.
Mhm.
So I really wish that she could
Yeah,
get
that makes
that.
sense. I mean, we recommend her all the time, so it doesn't even occur to me that she's not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that makes a lot. That I hear what you're saying. And your next author is also one of my favorites. When you sent me this list, I was just like, "You go, girl."
Yay! Thank you. Next one is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. It is written in prose, so it's going to be poetry. These two girls actually, and I read it a while ago, but they ended up being on the same plane, and their lives kind of intertwine in this instance because there is a disaster that happens. And I want to say it takes place in the DR. Yeah, Dominican Republic. And you don't you don't really see how they relate to each other yet. You find out a little bit later, and you have one girl who lives in Dominican Republic, and then you have one whose family visits the Dominican Republic. So you have those two kinds of, again, are you enough? Are you not? I'm sorry, that seems to be my theme. But they also deal with a lot of familial issues, a lot of grief as well. I did read this a while ago, and I just remember feeling so emotional when I was reading it, and I listened to it. So the narrator, one of them is Elizabeth Acevedo, the author. So hearing her have so much emotion and impact when she's voicing one of her characters was really, really good for me.
Hmm.
Sometimes that makes or break an audiobook. But this one I really like because it really talks about that identity again, and um family ties as well without spoiling it. Like, who's your family, who isn't? How do you accept people in your family when you have never met them before? And are they still, do you still want them in your life? And it's just a lot of identity themes going on in this one. But I love Elizabeth Acevedo. This was my first book from her, and this one definitely made me cry so much. So, yeah.
I think that it's amazing. I mean, poetry is a hard sell, I think, to begin with. And then Elizabeth does it so well. I think Kwame Alexander did it so well. Authors of color that were bringing poetry to people that didn't think that they got poetry. You know what I mean? Like it,
Yeah.
I was so pleased with that everybody felt like they deserved this sort of lyrical, different way of reading and writing.
Yeah, and I think the thing too is that poems don't necessarily have to rhyme either. And I know that some people kind of feel like, oh, it has to rhyme. It's hard if I don't make it rhyme or have a certain pedantic, the rhyming cycle. Sorry, I'm not a poetry expert, but the way that she wrote this was still very much prose. It still was impactful in the story enough that even if she didn't write it in prose, you would still be able to feel it. But I think her decision to make it prose made it just that much more powerful.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. I would read anything by her.
Yes. Okay, shifting to horror. Bat Eaters and Other Names for Cora Zhang by Kylie Lee Baker. She is one of my favorite authors. This one's an adult horror, actually. So I'm shifting from young adult to adult. This one actually just came out this year, and it takes place in New York City during COVID. So let's pretend that COVID is still very much in existence. We haven't really shut it down yet, but also, as you can tell probably by the name Bat Eaters and the main character Cora Zhang, there was a lot of xenophobia and racism when it came to Asian women. And this story is about Cora. She she was her and her sister actually were the victim of a terrible crime. Her sister really was the one. And due to that, she's had to change her life a little bit and be a crime scene cleaner. And now she's finding that a lot of the crime scenes that she's been cleaning up are all Asian women, and there's bats that seem to be following them around. So she's trying to figure out, is it a serial killer? What's going on? But also there's the supernatural element in that she thinks she sees her sister who was murdered. Sorry, that's not a spoiler alert. She was pushed in front of a subway, but she sees her as a hungry ghost. So is her sister trying to tell her who's behind all these things? Is her sister trying to say, this is who my murderer is and what's going on? It's very psychological. It has, it's Chinese elements in them well as far as like hungry ghosts and that culture of wanting to make sure that, or that spiritualness of wanting to make sure that you take care of your relatives because you don't want them to be roaming around the world hungry and desperate for food. And what does that mean? And it was horrifying and I loved it. It was so good. So,
So I
yeah.
am not a horror reader. I do appreciate it, but it was it more like creepy or scary or gory or what made it horror for you?
There's definitely some gory parts with when there are ghosts around and just, there's dealing with murder. And then also, I think what made it really horrific for me as well is that even without the supernatural elements, that is something that was happening in the world during the time of COVID. That Asian women were being targeted by people solely because they were being blamed for the COVID um, outbreak, pandemic. And to me, having horror with, you know, facts or like, current events and stuff that happen in it does make it a bit horrifying for me because I'm like, this could happen. And who knows if there really was a serial killer in New York or somewhere that was just targeting Asian women solely because they were angry because of COVID. Just that type of human behavior towards people is makes it terrifying. But the ghost was also really scary.
Ghosts can be scary. Okay,
Yeah.
so next one looks really interesting. I have not heard of this author until you sent me this.
Yes. So this one is Hijab Butch Blues by Lamia H. This one I read recently. Lamia is a queer author, and she was going through her queer identity story basically with the Quran. And she comes across a story about one of the women in the Quran, and she kind of listens to her story and is like, is this girl like me? And is it okay to be queer in my religion and my identity? So she talks about different religious women in the Quran in different parts of her life, and she describes how they relate to her and how she ends up learning to be more, sure of herself with her queerness, more proud of herself, but also talks about like her journey and struggle of trying to figure out that identity, being forced to like have to hide it in certain situations, and even just dealing with being a queer brown woman in the US as well. And it was this, I don't normally read memoirs either, but this was one of the first ones that I read that I just was really, really enap en enamored with. I really liked it. So I recommend this one.
Mhm. There just seems like a lot going on there, between being a brown LGBTQ woman in
Mhm.
America, also wearing the hijab, which is
Yes.
very so many issues for people there. Um, it sounds like that it was very rich. Like there was just so many things that she could deal with.
Yes. And Lamia is not the name that she goes by, so you never see her face or anything in her photos. So you don't know who exactly she is, but that is the identity that she chose to have when she wrote this story.
Good for her.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Next one, Ana
Oh,
Maria and the Fox by
yep.
Liana de la Rosa. This is adult historical romance. I love historical romances. I read this one this year. That's three girls. They're the Luna sisters, and um, they emigrate from Mexico. Yes, from Mexico to England. And it's really because their dad is a very prominent, powerful Mexican government official.
Mhm.
But because of everything that's going on in this time, and it's like Victorian era, um, they need to protect the girls from political violence and whatnot. But this is a love story between Anna Maria and a boy named Gideon. His last name is Fox, so he goes by the Fox. And not only are they dealing with being brown in, England as well, and basically people are kind of thinking that, oh, they're not really smart, they don't have, a lot of big background and stuff, but they're also dealing with learning how to be themselves in a world where they were always having to follow a straight line. And this is a really beautiful story. There's a lot more political intrigue in there as well, but my focus was on the romance a little bit because I wanted to see Anna Maria just kind of get out of her shell and
Mhm.
not be the older sister having to fall in line. So
I love her covers. Liana's covers are, they're just, they're not cute. They're like, like how cartoony covers are taking over romances.
yes.
They're not cartoony. They're animated, but I don't know. I just love them. I think they're very evocative of the story.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's one of my favorite. I think that's why I gravitated towards buying all of them again, was because I love the covers. I'm
Hmm.
sorry, I'm pulling up the last book because I know I don't have a copy of it, but I wanted to make sure I had it on hand. I forgot to tell you. But
Okay.
this one is Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kauai Strong Washburn. I also read this with my Page Surfer group. This one is actually kind of close to home because it takes place in Hawaii. Not
Mhm.
only does it take place in the big island of Hawaii, but it also takes place on Oahu and then some places in the mainland as well. But in Hawaiian culture, sharks are very much revered as spiritual creatures. Some of them are gods as well. And in this story, one of the kids, the main kids in the story, his name is Nainoa, when they were on a cruise going from Hilo or Kailua Kona to Oahu, he fell into shark infested waters. And he was 7 years old. And they all thought he was going to die. And he was protected by the sharks.
Hmm.
And that really changed a lot for his family because he was seen as a miracle. He was seen like a very spiritual person. Why was he protected by these sharks when if anybody else would have fallen in there, they probably wouldn't have made it, especially if he was 7 years old. So it not only deals with grief as well and because somebody in their family just isn't there, but it comes from the mom and dad's perspective and then the siblings' perspective as well. And just learning about what it means to live with their culture outside of Hawaii, how that one instance in their life really changed their lives for them, but did it change it in the better or worse, and just different family dynamics. So um, this one was a really interesting one to read. I listened to it, and I'm glad I did because all of the voice actors really made it seem like I was back home. Like if I was in the mainland, I would be like, "Yep, that's exactly how I know people to talk," and it just really felt like I was immersed in the past in Hawaii as well.
Hmm. Wow. Well, you know that this is the 50th anniversary of Jaws this year.
Yes.
So, so very real. But I love that. That's such a different take on, a family story. That's that's why I love this diversity, topic because I'm just learning stuff all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, because the sharks, you would think they would be malicious or not malicious, but they're going to defend their territory. So what was it about Nainoa that they were like, nope, we're gonna allow you to live and have somebody save you and
Mhm.
live your life. So that was really interesting. Second to last book, I went horror again, The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas. This is YA. This deals with not only racial hatred, I'm sorry, racial hatred and discrimination, but also has some ghost possession in it as well. And Jake is trying to find out what happened to one of his neighbors. They were killed because that person seems to be trying to take over his body for to enact some sort of revenge. So we're not only hearing from Jake, but we're also hearing from this other character from his past, but also when he tries to take over Jake and figure out why there's so much hatred going on in this boy in and why is he taking it out on Jake? Why is he using Jake as this weapon to enact his revenge? And also Jake having to kind of deal with his own family issues as well with his mom and his brother. And this was the first YA book from Ryan Douglas, I think, or his actual debut. So I don't normally do horror, but I noticed I've done a couple horror books in here, but it was a really, really interesting story. And I'm always trying to show some Black boys in books as well. So this was one that I really liked. And I'm sorry, Jake, that you had to go through hauntings, but it was such a good story.
Um, can I ask you a question about community? Because um, I feel like the horror community is pretty welcoming to new voices, new and diverse, new and different. I'm not going to say diverse, but new and different voices. Do you find that as have you like in your travels? Have you seen that as well? Because like I'm a romance reader, and I know that there's a lot more diversity in romance now, but there's also been some pushback from like some of the more senior or older authors. So I didn't know if that was the case in the horror community as well.
I'll be honest, I don't read horror as much as I just reflected in this section, but I do feel, oh, sorry.
And we have a dog sighting.
Yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear them?
Not too much. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry. I feel like there because you can have different types of horror, and horror can be rooted in truth as well. That I think they're a lot more welcoming than other genres because horror can have so many different subgenres, and what's horrifying to one may not be horrifying to another, and that's why there can be so much room for different types. But I do feel I just because I don't read a lot of horror, I I still when I look at like the horror community, I definitely feel like they're a lot more like, hey, come join us. We're not that scary, even though the content is, but not the people. So yeah, like because the types of horror that I find are not like jump scare very much or like body gore as much, but they do definitely deal with a lot of culture identity and racial identity and just like things that happen in real life in our world, but in a way that is just so unsettling for people who are reading it that have never experienced it that I'm like, yeah, dude, that's terrifying. Like I would not want to be in it. So I think that kind of horror helps me in a way because it doesn't keep me awake at night like to scare me, but it does still make me think about it. And I think I think to answer your question, I would say the horror community is probably a more welcoming because it's a way to express that without having to be limited to like certain tropes and formulaic, not formulaic, but like different tropes that
Mhm.
maybe other genres like romance have to.
And Lily says that horror is also a smaller genre, um, although it's picked up a lot of speed. It's having its moment right now. And when I've had programs with horror authors, the audience is completely different from the audiences I have when I have any other genre, including romance. So we get the younger people, the LGBTQ, the tatted up, super cool. I want to be them when I grow up kind of people. And
Yeah,
everybody, men, women, young, young, old. It's very, very open.
yeah.
So that's at least what I've seen, and that's why I was asking about the welcome. But I also think that not romance, fantasy and horror are good avenues to take when you're trying to talk about some difficult issues like racism or, whatever the issues are, because then it has a slight barrier there, like, oh, this is fantasy, that couldn't happen, but oh yeah, that kind of did happen here, only with this and that. So that's what I think. I'm not sure how you feel about that, Leland.
No, I feel the same way. Like, especially like when I read horror and there's a lot of feminine rage, especially because like let's say with that. eater, another name. There was a lot of violence towards women, Asian women.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a way to, there was feminine rage in it, in that someone ended up fighting back. And to me, that's really empowering, because it's like, yeah, we live in a world where different community members, like women a lot, are very much mistreated, or were used as like plot points for men's story to move along. There's violence towards us for no other reason than to move the story along. So
Mm-hmm.
in these genres, yes, there are violence that happens, but sometimes those characters can get revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes it a little, it also addresses it in a way like, when you see something wrong, you can and you should say something out against it without feeling like you're going to be, you know, punished. That's how I
Right.
feel about it.
Yeah. And again, that horror or fantasy allows for people to think of it in a way that's not as difficult for them, because it's not realistic fiction where you're like, oh, that could happen, that could happen. Whereas,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not explaining this right, but it's on my head right.
No,
So,
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
okay.
Okay. The last one, and my library didn't have a copy of it, but it's called An Ordinary Wonder by Buki Papillon, and I can't really show it. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I read this because my library ended up like giving me an option for it. But this one was a really interesting story because the main character was born as a boy, but really identified as a male, but also had both parts.
Like,
So I don't want to say
genitalia.
the, yeah, like intersex, I want to say was the term, but they grew up in Africa. And I forget which country. I want to say it was Nigeria. So of course they suffered a lot of violence towards them because of that. So not only is it their journey of trying to figure out who they identify as, what their identity is, but also trying to um, get through that mistreatment, not only from family members, but also from just friends, and learning more about what makes them really special and how to overcome it. But it was a while ago that I listened to it. I never would have read it if it wasn't for my library doing a Ready Read subscription and said, "Hey, this seems like your vibe. Try listen to it," and it really was. But I think this was the first book that I read that also had an intersex character, and I think what made it really interesting as well was the fact that it took place not in the US, but in Africa, where you do have a different stigma for LGBTQ and different sexual and identities that you don't think about it sometimes in the US, or if you're in a place that is a little bit more tolerant and accepting. So how was that heightened there, and what can you appreciate about living in a place that is a little bit more accepting than if you were somewhere else? But yeah, that one, it was, I wish I could find a copy. I don't know, but I really liked it. And that's
Mhm.
where I'm ending today.
Well, I'm going to ask, was Anna Maria the only book that had a happy ending here? Because they all sound kind of rough.
Um, no. Wow, the way I said that kind of sounds like no. Um, I would say, I mean, Hijab Butch Blues, like it does end pretty nice, and everything else has a satisfying ending, not necessarily happy.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure because they all sound like they were, except for Anna. Well, Anna Maria also had some issues, but the it is a romance, so you know that it's going to have a happy ending. So I just
Right.
know that there's a conclusion. I watched this movie the other day called The Lunchbox, and it was an Indian movie where it's set in India with all kinds of interesting things happen. If you get a chance to watch it on Canopy, it's great, except that it has an ambiguous ending. And I was like, no, I need to know what's going to happen to these characters.
I hate those. I hate and love them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of have a sense of what happened, but I was also like, just tell me. Just tell me. I want to see.
Exactly.
Well, Leland, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful trip. And for everybody who's been here, thank you so much for listening. And I will send out that list and the recording, and I will see you next month.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.